Chris, thank you for joining me. You are the author of the Substack newsletter Can't Get Much Higher, which bridges music and data. You've also been featured on NPR and The Economist, and you have a book coming out, Uncharted Territory: What Numbers Tell Us About the Biggest Hit Songs and Ourselves, which you describe as a data-driven history of popular music. And on top of that, you are a senior product manager at AudioMac, where you focus on data analytics and personalization. Did I capture everything? Is there anything else you want to add?
No, that is all true. No lies were detected there.
Cool. Yeah, well, I love your combo. Obviously, as someone in data myself, love that you work with data. And then I have dabbled in music, just for fun as well. So I think it's really cool kind of exploring the data side of music. I don't think anyone else that I'm aware of is really doing that in a way of like storytelling. Certainly, there are streaming services that use our data, but I think kind of turning that around and sharing stories, I think is really cool. So before we dive into more of the data side of things, I know you yourself are a musician, so I'm curious, what do you play?
Yeah, playing music is my first love and like what drew me into wanting to be involved in music and the music industry. And I play certainly the guitar most proficiently. That's what I do most musical writing on. I also sing. Uh, and because I play the guitar, I can sort of bang around on a couple other instruments like the bass and the piano, but guitar is where my proficiency lies. And if someone asks me what I play, I usually say I'm a guitar player.
Awesome. Do you play like regularly? Are you in a band that performs, or is this more just your own hobby?
I've been playing pretty regularly since I was like 11 or 12. Uh, I've
Mhm.
I used to live in Boston. I live in Hoboken, New Jersey now, which is just outside New York. When I lived in Boston, I fronted a band that would play very regularly in and around the city. I feel like we played at most of the small clubs by the time I moved back to New Jersey. Now I'll play occasional acoustic cover gigs with my cousin John. I have a second cousin named John who has a punk band. I'll play bass with them pretty regularly. I think that I missed the last gig or two, so hopefully they don't kick me out. And that's brought me a lot of joy with the bass guitar. And I play in a cover band sometimes. So I still play pretty regularly. It's not as much of my original stuff as I was doing, say, 5 or 6 years ago, but
Mhm.
I'm still out there.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's good. It's always good to have outlets, especially creative outlets. And one thing I've heard, and this was from like coworkers, so I've never actually like read a study on this, but I've heard that people who are very analytical and like work in quantitative fields, um, they all have like a hobby, like music or dance or some kind of like structured artsy hobby. And I think it makes a lot of sense. Like I myself, play have played a couple of instruments. I really like dance and choreography. And like I feel like there's something there that like scratches the same part of your brain between like math and coding and then like reading music or learning choreography. And I'm curious if you think there's a connection or if you've ever thought about that or if you kind of feel like maybe there's some connection for you.
I've certainly thought about it because I remember growing up, I felt like the people were always like, oh, you're either into math and science or you're into English and history. And I sort of like both sides. I really liked reading and writing, but I also enjoyed being in the math classroom. And for me, those both scratched a similar itch. There was a creativeness to both sides. I feel like in general associate creativity with like writing, but I studied math in college, and when you're trying to prove something mathematically or when you're trying to figure out how to code something up, it involves a lot of creative problem solving. And
Hmm.
maybe there's a little bit more structure just based on how mathematical thinking works.
Hmm.
But for me, these are very, very similar problems that you're trying to solve. If I'm trying to figure out how to finish writing a song or working on a melody or if I'm writing an article, to me, I'm tapping into the same thing as if, I was working on trying to figure out how to solve an integral in college. Obviously, like I said, solving an integral, there's usually a little bit more structure, but there are really creative ways that people use math and computer languages that are very, very similar to how people use, traditional
Hmm.
languages and how people write songs. So I think there's definitely a connection. I work in the music business, so not surprisingly, a lot of people that I work with have musical outlets.
Hmm.
Um, but I do think I have not read anything rigorous on the topic, but I think there is something there to what you're getting at.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, so you mentioned you studied math and you've been playing music since you were 11. So what inspired you to kind of bring those two things together? And I assume your newsletter came first. What inspires you to start that? Or were you doing projects before you kind of turned it into a newsletter?
So it a whole I've always my first love is playing music, listening to music, playing music, going to shows, playing in bands. So I've always been into music. And when I graduated college, I thought it'd be cool to be able to combine my what I thought were my very employable, math, economics, programming skills with my love for music and culture generally. I wasn't able to do that right out of college. I ended up working in consulting. But while I was working in consulting, I came up with this quest that I was going to listen to every number one hit in history. And this was just sort of a musical outlet for the end of the day. I would listen to one song a day. It was the Billboard's pop chart, which started in 1958. And I would, play along on my guitar, and it became like a very relaxing thing to do at the end of the day. Because I worked with data slowly over time, I started tracking lots of things about these songs. Started noticing some trends. I wrote up something, sent it off to an old English professor I had in college, and he was like, "Oh, this is pretty good. You should keep at this." And when I had him in college, he was like pretty brutally honest. So I was like, okay,
Mm,
I must really be onto something here. So I kept at that. I ended up getting a job in the music business. And after a certain point, I was like, I have the makings of a book here, but I've never really published anything.
mhm,
So I got advice from a writer at Billboard or Rolling Stone. I don't remember. I cold emailed and he was like, it's really hard to get a book published. It's a lot easier to get articles published. He was like, start there.
mhm,
So I started pitching articles. This is probably like 2019. I eventually had this article go super viral for a website called Tedium about how there were fewer key changes in popular music. And this was based off data that I had from this number one hits data set that I created, which is actually I made public. I can send it to you to include a link for anyone that wants to use it. That ended up leading me to appearing on NPR. I wrote stuff for The Economist, slowly built up a bunch of connections. And eventually I was able to find a publisher for this book through almost dumb luck. I posted a TikTok about a number one hit called Want Ads by Honeycomb, which I think is this awesome 70s song that's completely forgotten. And this Billboard writer, Fred Bronson, saw it. He emailed me. He eventually connected me with his editor at Bloomsbury. And now we have this book coming out. So it was this long, very circuitous journey. But I was working on the book and then I started the newsletter to try to build up an audience to be like, to tell a publisher, hey, people are interested in this weird combination of music and data.
mhm.
So the newsletter all sort of wrapped together in a weird knot, but it started with me trying to get a book published and then realizing that I needed an audience first.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think so my career before I even got into analytics was in marketing and communication. And it's just been so interesting, like how communication has evolved over the past, 20, 25 years, where it used to be, yeah, you needed to find a publisher or you needed to get into, an existing publication to get an audience. And now you can just start your own Substack. You can go on TikTok. I think it's so fascinating,
Yeah.
kind of how that's evolved.
And
Um, One question because you mentioned how like songs don't have as many key changes. I'm
mhm.
curious, like one comment you always hear from people is like music isn't as good as it used to be, or like the music today isn't as good. Is there anything to that? Not that it's not as good, but that it's different. Like what are some other ways that music is different today versus, 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago?
It's a fascinating question, and I think that's why that anytime this chart gets shared of you see like from the 60s to the 80s, about 20% of number one hits have a key change. Then around 2003, it goes to zero. Lots of people start yelling like, "This is proof that we don't know how to write songs anymore." And it's not exactly that. I mean, most of those key changes from back in the day were not super sophisticated. It was
Mm-mm.
just the last chorus going up a half step or a whole step. Think I want to dance with somebody or
Mhm.
living on a prayer. It injects energy, but I would not highlight that as like the height of musical sophistication.
Mhm.
Regardless, still a very sharp um, shift. You don't really hear those key changes anymore in pop songs. I think the biggest thing is hip hop became so dominant in the last 25, 30 years.
Mhm.
And hip hop, very broadly, I mean, there are many different grains of hip hop, but in the broadest strokes, hip hop is much more focused on rhythm and lyricism than melody and harmony, which are, I would say, the
Mhm.
two core components
Mhm.
of, when you think of Great American Songbook songs or even songs up through the 80s, these have
Mhm.
hummable or singable melodies. When you think of a lot of big hip hop songs, say Lose Yourself by Eminem, which was a huge number one hit, like you're not humming the melody of Lose Yourself to, while you're in the shower. It doesn't mean it's a bad song. I think it's a very, very good song. But that shift, I would say, is one of the most dramatic
Mhm.
shifts. And I think it's why a lot of older people are confused by hip hop specifically, because it's dramatically different art form than most
Mhm.
rock and pop based music that was popular throughout the second half of the 20th century. Is that better or worse? Probably a subjective choice, but it's
Mhm.
certainly different. I don't think you could argue that it's the same.
Mhm. Yeah. Also, do you feel, and is there any like proof to this, that music has gotten more formulaic? Like hits have maybe kind of like follow a formula, like we want this to go number one, so this is a formula we follow. Like, do you see any evidence of that?
Good question. I write about this actually a couple times in the book.
Hmm.
And one thing you see with number one hits is that clustered around a certain year, the most popular songs are usually quite similar in a lot of regards and, instrumental palette, in structure. One reason that I think you could argue that there was more similarity among pop hits in the 2000s and the 2010s is there's this guy I write about in the book named Max Martin, who was a tremendously, tremendously successful songwriter. He wrote his first number one hit was Baby One More Time for Britney Spears,
Hmm.
and he's written hits consistently throughout the last 25 years, to the point where he is probably the most successful songwriter of all time outside of Paul McCartney, which is crazy. He's this Swedish guy that, eschews the press. But he had so much success and he had so many people who followed in his footsteps that they started to follow the structure that
Hmm.
he found success with, which it is heavily melodically focused. Lyricism is not really as important, and it's all about building up to the biggest
Hmm.
chorus you could possibly imagine. Max Martin and his acolytes were big fans of 80s hair metal bands like Bon Jovi and
Hmm.
The Final Countdown by Europe, Pour Some Sugar on Me by Def Leppard. And I think
Hmm.
there is some proof that there was homogeneity among big hits of the, early 2010s because Max Martin and the people he worked with were just so successful. Uh, but we see homogeneity in other eras too. Other people in the 60s were trying to replicate the Motown sound that was very popular. So it's not like this was the first time this ever happened. But I think these Swedish songwriters had a very big effect on the way popular music sounded then and still sounds to a degree to this day.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Okay, switching gears, to kind of talk more about the data analysis side of things. What is the tech stack that you use when kind of doing your analysis and any visualizations?
For my day job, I work for a streaming service called Audio Mac,
Hmm.
where I work with music and data. My stack there, or I spend most of my time working in SQL, Python, Pandas, and Excel. Excel is one of those things you can't kill it, you can't really
Mm-mm.
get away from it, no matter what.
No.
And I think Excel in general is a great tool,
Hmm.
regardless. For my newsletter, most analysis I'm doing is with Pandas and
Hmm.
Excel, and I do my visualization with Data Wrapper, which is a great free data visualization tool. And that's mostly what I used for the book too, those tools, just Pandas and Excel. But the visualization was done by my friend Kayleen Nerney. So
Hmm.
Those visualizations were highly customized, and I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure she made them in Adobe Illustrator or
Oh,
something.
yeah.
But if it's just me, who is somewhat graphically challenged, I'll use Data Wrapper, which is a great tool for anyone who's not familiar with it.
Awesome. Is that a Python package or is that a standalone tool?
It's like a company data wrapper. If you look
Okay.
at visualizations in like the New York Times and The Economist,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them are
Yeah.
based on that. I
Oh,
don't.
okay.
So it's just a website you can go to. You input your data, and there's a million different visualizations.
Okay.
So I do most stuff from that. I just have a free account,
Hmm.
uh, but you could use a paid account and you can put like your own branding on it, and there's some other bells and whistles. But the free account is quite robust.
Hmm. Nice. Yeah. I feel like, Python has so many visualization packages, but other than, using something in a PowerPoint, like if you want something a little more slick, it's not, I haven't found anything great in Python that looks really
Yeah, I
like
also feel like
visually pleasing.
a lot of stuff to make it visually pleasing involves like point and click to some degree.
Hmm.
And in my experience, the Python visualization packages like aren't perfect for that. It's like sort of cumbersome to do tons of customization, whereas these other online platforms, it's much easier.
Hmm. Cool. Um, So one question I get a lot from people who are trying to break into the data industry is, how to come up with project ideas, how to put together their portfolio, like how to create something that will impress a hiring manager. And I feel like looking through your newsletter, like that, it to me is like a master class of like if you were someone trying to break into the field and you were like, I'm passionate about music, here's all this data analysis I've done and these unique insights I've found that would really be impressive. So what advice would you have about someone who's trying to maybe do their own projects or they're trying to like use their passion for their portfolio? What advice do you have for them?
I think the thing that I found is I can't really, or I don't really write about stuff that doesn't interest me.
Hmm.
So if a question is interesting to me, if it's something that's going to keep me up at night, even if it seems sort of obscure, there's probably someone else out there that will think that way too. So I just have a notebook, and whenever I think of something vaguely interesting, this notebook is literally just bullet points. And when I sit down every week to write my newsletter, I just flip through. I'm like, all right, what's interesting here?
Hmm.
And then I go and try to find data for it. The nice thing, especially in the cultural industries these days, is that since everything's online, there's so much data, not just music, movies, books, television. Uh, it's not too difficult to find data to answer a lot of these questions. But I think most of it starts with it's just something that interests you. And
Hmm.
there's a great newsletter called Experimental History. Um, and I'm friends with the guy that writes it. And he wrote this piece about how everyone is probably uniquely good at one thing
Hmm.
or has
Hmm.
interests that are very unique, but you have to spend a lot of time looking for that. So like music and data, I guess, has become my thing and it's somewhat
Hmm.
niche combining those two things. But if there are things that interest you, other people will probably be interested in it.
Hmm.
And I always try to listen to people around me. I mean, since I've been doing this now, friends and family are always asking me questions. Some of them I don't think would work for a whole newsletter, but a lot of stuff I write, one of my most popular editions recently was about two-hit wonders. So artists, rather than one hit, have two.
Yeah.
That was something my coworker asked me one day, and it ended up being quite popular. So, keep your ears and eyes open. And if something strikes you as interesting, it'll probably interest someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that's important. Like pick something you're really interested in because like you're going to want to dive deep into it versus if it's something that you think might look better on your resume, you might not care as much, you might not go as far or come up with really interesting questions to answer. So I
Totally.
think that's a good starting place. Um, okay, you have a quote I saw on your newsletter that you believe a great song can save your life. I'm curious, what is a song that has saved your life?
It's funny hearing that read back to me. It's just so dramatic. Uh, I do believe that Save Your Life obviously sounds really dramatic, but there are so many songs that at certain points in my life have really given me solace for whatever was
Hmm.
going on. I'm a huge Bruce Springsteen fan, and the
Hmm.
Springsteen catalog, time and time again, has touched my soul deeply. I could think the song Thunder Road, the opening track on um, Bruce's Born to Run, is the first song that comes to mind when I think of that. For some
Mm,
reason, the second one that comes to mind, completely unrelated, is called All My Friends by LCD Sound System. It's this 8 minute masterpiece that just starts with like a minute and a half of just the same looping chord over and over again. But it's one of these songs that just washes over you, and I at least wish it would never end. So those are two that come to mind, but
mhm.
I could go on and on about that topic.
Yeah. No, I thought that was a great quote. And even, yeah, it does sound dramatic, but I think like we all have songs that just like resonate with us and like either are your like pump up song to get you in a good mood, or when you're feeling a certain way, like provide comfort or like remind you of a certain time in your life, or maybe like help you come back to like who you are at your core. So I think,
Yeah,
yeah, music can be so powerful.
I definitely talk about that, at least tangentially in the book a lot,
Hmm.
is, I'm writing about some somewhat serious topics related to music, like racial representation,
Mm, hmm.
and I don't know how that stuff comes to mind as like more serious stuff. But at the end of the day, you have to remember, like, these are pop songs, and to a
Mm.
degree, it's like, how serious should I take Sugar Sugar by the Archies? So I really have this dual thing in my head is like, this is what I'm doing is silly, but it's also the most serious thing you could possibly do because music usually represents something larger than whatever the song itself does.
Hmm.
And songs themselves mean a lot to people, even if
Hmm.
they themselves seem sort of silly.
Yeah. Is there a music data insight that surprised you?
I'm countless, consistently surprised. The thing that I touch on a lot in the book is this idea that musical innovation or musical changes are often downstream of technological innovations.
Hmm.
And you see that again and again. The one thing people bring up often is the length of popular songs. From like the 40s to the late 60s, songs were stuck in like the 2.5 minute range.
Hmm.
And part of the reason for that is um, vinyl singles
Hmm.
could not hold more sound than that. If you tried to put more sound on, it would just, the sonic quality would degrade.
Hmm.
In the late 60s, we see some improvements and suddenly get longer singles like Hey Jude by the Beatles or like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan. So this is an innovation, an artistic innovation, but it's made possible by the fact that there was a technological innovation. And this continues, you see this again and again. More recently, songs, hit songs have gotten shorter, and people always point to the financial model of streaming and how people
Hmm.
listen to the streaming age for that. So technology or music is often downstream of technology. I don't think it's deterministic, but it certainly impacts what artists do. And I see that, the song length example is a good one, but that's something I would see constantly throughout the book is there would be really subtle changes to technology and it would
Hmm.
dramatically impact what I would see in the data and what you would hear in the songs.
Hmm. That's so interesting. But yeah, it makes so much sense. Um, is there a song or album that you think is underrated and why?
Yeah, I actually was writing recently about underratedness. It was about what's the most underrated song of the
Mm,
80s and trying to measure
mm,
this by saying something underrated if it's really good but not very popular.
hmm.
So for really good, I found like lists of the most critically acclaimed songs of the 80s. And for really
Mm,
popular, I just looked at Spotify streams and sort of compared those. Something by the Smiths came out on top.
mm.
Though I'm not a huge Smiths fan, so I would not, that wouldn't be, that's my data-driven answer.
Right.
Uh, one of my favorite bands is this 80s punk band called The Replacements. And they're critically celebrated. I think they're tremendously underrated. They were never as popular as I think they could have been. A lot of that was because they repeatedly shot themselves in the foot. Like they get booked on SNL and they show up really drunk and um, make enemies with the SNL, the people of SNL, and don't get invited back. So I think their catalog is tremendously underrated. And they have an album called Let It Be, same album name as the Beatles album. Um, and I think it's a tremendously, tremendously, tremendously underrated album. It's just grade A songwriting. It's irreverent, and it never really crossed over to the pop world. But I think it could have if circumstances were different and maybe
Mhm.
the replacements drank a little less. But, can't go back.
Yeah, I'd like to see that data analysis of like, are there artists who kind of shot themselves in the foot by like their drinking habits or drug habits? I mean, certainly like if they, overdosed or something, but I wonder
Yeah.
kind of what's if we can find a mathematical relationship between like lifestyle and their
So I
like
did
success.
I did years ago do a piece. It was one of the more depressing pieces I did about how musicians die when they die. I said young, which for my case was less than 40.
Hmm.
And there are some very disheartening trends about, drug use and whatnot. One thing that was a good trend was musicians used to die traveling a lot more often.
Oh,
You're on the road a lot, but
yeah,
travel gotten safer. I mean,
yeah.
planes aren't going down as much as
Hmm.
often as they were when, there's so many musicians who died in planes. Buddy Holly,
Hmm.
many members of Leonard Skinner, John Denver. Travel safer, so that's one nice thing.
Yeah, interesting. Um, Looking to the future, do you have like a hope or fear, like an analytics or data related hope or fear for the future of music discovery?
Yeah, I mean it's a double-edged sword in that there's so much music out there now, which is great. Anyone can upload, same as you were saying earlier, anyone could start a newsletter. But because of that, it makes it very hard to sift through all this stuff. It's very hard to break through the noise. My biggest concern is that with the release of AI music tools, that streaming services will just be flooded with AI music that will
Mm-hmm.
overwhelm everything else. And the reason for that is streaming services were already seeing hundreds of thousands of uploads a day. And this is before you can generate a song with 2 clicks. So I don't see a situation where, unless streaming services or distributors or labels decide to choke that off, that those AI generated songs don't completely overwhelm these services.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not completely anti-AI generated music or using AI to create music because this is something you also see throughout the history of music is new technology makes people scared and they say that's not real music.
Hmm.
You see this with the creation of recording or the creation of radio or even microphones, auto tune, drum machines. There's something weird about AI in that you just click a button and you get output. But I could imagine there are some cool use cases that people will find. My concern is that, again, you'll just have someone generate a million songs and try to upload all of them.
Hmm.
I think that's going to lead to a worse listening experience for people because it's so hard to sift through things already.
Hmm. Hmm. Cool. One last question. Do you ever listen to over the air radio with like a human DJ?
Yeah, like, terrestrial in the car.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. Usually I'm in
Okay.
the car. I was a radio DJ in college. My university had a radio station, so I love radio.
Hmm.
I think radio is still sneakily important to the music
Hmm.
industry, certainly not as important as it once was in
Oh,
breaking
yeah.
hits. But radio became much more consolidated after there was a law passed
Hmm.
in 1996. Um, so we lost a lot of regional programming then, but I still think there's a lot of cool stuff going on in the world of terrestrial and internet radio.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I've had some discussions with people who like were so shocked to find out I still listen to the normal radio in the car. And they're like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you don't, put on streaming service." And like, what about commercials? And I'm like, you can go to the next station and, and skip the commercials. And it just, I don't know, something kind of made me a little sad that there's people who never listen to just kind of the regular. I mean, I think my husband probably doesn't. If I'm not in the car, he's probably putting on, streaming service. And
I mean,
um, so yeah.
there's something nice about not picking what you're listening to
Yes.
sometimes.
Yes. And I still discover new things
Yeah,
listening to like my local alternative rock station. So yeah, I'm just like, I hope this doesn't, go away completely because I do still enjoy. But it's only when I'm in my car, which is like how
yeah,
often am I in my car?
yeah.
So,
I think we often underrate. I think people think they want more choice than they actually do.
hmm.
Where people it's obviously I work in the music business, I work in a streaming service. It's great you could go on and find any song ever.
Yeah.
But I think it's very easy for people just to listen to the same stuff over and over
Hmm.
again. Sometimes it's nice to put your listening in the hands of someone else to
Hmm.
discover something new.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. Was there any like final thoughts or any questions you have for me?
No, I mean, thanks for having me. My
Yeah.
book is called Uncharted Territory, and people could buy it wherever you buy books. And my newsletter is called Can't Get Much Higher, and I'm always talking about music and data. I'm an easy guy to find online, Chris Dalla Riva. If you're looking to get into a musical argument, I'm there for you.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks again and hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Yeah, let me know if you need anything else from me in the interim.
Okay.